Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here, Saket. Hi everyone. Thank you so much for everybody joining in. It's pretty early here in the UK, and so just to give an introduction about myself, I'm currently working as a net zero consultant, but I'm mostly focused on developing policies, and currently I'm helping out an organization called Young Women in Sustainable Development as their policy director. Our major focus is we are a bunch of young women who are trying to get this message out in the world that, along with a key aspect of getting all the sustainable aspects within the UN SDGs, is to also having the voice of young women who are able to significantly contribute to this growth, this net zero transition that we are all working towards. What we are trying to accomplish is that, like I said, we are based out of Australia, but we have women from across all over the world, specifically from the MENA region, the APAC, and we also have some form of extended arms in the North Americas and South America. So we have women from all across globe, and we are trying to make sure that they are using this organization as a platform to accelerate their voices. And we have our CEO and founder who's also working in the UN sector. She is I should say she, because we have that form of linkage to the UN. We want to make sure that all our collaborations, all our work, everything gets proper recognition through channels where the world will be able to see that, okay, so a bunch of young women who are in their own space working towards something, but also trying to use this organization to accelerate their voices in terms of sustainable development and trying to address different UN SDGs. First of all, this topic is very hot at the moment because many organizations, many intergovernmental, you know, platforms or organizations are trying to have carbon pricing as a key tool, as a key policy instrument. Well, like you said, there are many pros and cons to it. Given we are also we just this world just came out of a pandemic and is trying to get back on track with the economy being not so great around the world. So I would say the hidden definition for a carbon pricing would be very simple. Like you said, it's just a price we put on the per ton of carbon that a person or an organization or a corporation or a corporate sector entity emits to, into the atmosphere. And because we understand that um, it is important to offset some of the emissions because these are unavoidable emissions. A key tool for carbon offsetting should be carbon pricing. But yeah, we can discuss more on that and come to a conclusion on how we can use that as a very strong policy tool. Okay, so I would like to start with breaking down this whole thing because you've included a lot of things into this. So just for our viewers, let's break it down a little bit. And to start with, so of course we have different types of carbon pricing. Like we said, it's just a price we put on carbon. So just like anything else, for example, a loaf of bread. If you want to buy a loaf of bread, you put either tax on the ingredients, put a tax on the final outcome or the final output of that product. Similarly, for carbon emissions, because it's a little less tangible than a loaf of bread, because again, to start with, people need to know how much carbon emissions are being done from their operations. Um, Whether it's a huge corporate or a normal person, they're commuting, a person's commute, a person's mostly it's commute. It's from transport, the emissions from their houses. Similarly for corporates. So it's first of all, it is very important to know where your carbon emissions are coming from. How will you map your entire carbon emissions, starting from zero up until your final product? It's like whole life carbon assessment. Once you are totally aware or at least know your scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions. So just for the viewers, scope 1 is direct emissions which are burning fuels. It could be from your petrol cars or your diesel cars, or it could be from directly from your factories if you're burning fossil fuels in any direct way. Scope 2 emissions are emissions from electricity, a type of electricity you're being used that you use in your homes, in your offices, in your factories, or real estate anywhere. All types of emissions from electricity generated views would be scope 2, and scope 3 is the most difficult, of course, because scope 3 emissions are hard to calculate, hard to map because of the supply chain complexity of the, yeah, upstream and downstream supply chain. Um, so this is where carbon pricing comes into picture, because those are externalities from a pure economics perspective. These are the externalities that we are trying to internalize. That is where we have carbon pricing into picture. We are paying the price for somebody else using our product or somebody else using our service. So, like you said, there are two main segments of carbon pricing. One is taxes, which everybody is afraid of or clearly want to avoid, as people in living in, um, as both of us have, lived in a couple of countries, and we know that different countries, different taxes. We clearly understand the importance of too much tax cuts. So people don't really want that tax. But the other one is, of course, cap and trade emissions. And I believe that that is currently, different countries and different continents have their own ways of dealing with the cap and trade system. It's basically you put up you put a market price on carbon, and then based on whether or not your emissions are up to the mark. For example, I have put $20 per ton, let's say, um, for 1 ton of carbon, and then I am I put a cap that, okay, above 100 tons of carbon per month, you can, or you will have to start paying for every ton of carbon. So if my emissions for this month is, say, for example, 80 tons, then I don't have to pay, or I will have to pay a very subsidized cost. But then if it's more than, let's say, 120 tons, so then I'll have to pay the difference. So that is basically the basic explanation of a carbon cap and trade system. It was first introduced in the EU ETS, of course, the European Union Emissions Trading Scheme. And I think they have set a very good example in terms of how to take this forward, especially with their diesel engine policy that they have released, the Euro. Yes, definitely. That they have set a very good example for the remaining world in terms of how to go about it. There is, of course, the issue of carbon leakage, which I think we'll cover in the next segment, which is a whole different topic in itself. But yes, carbon taxing, second is a second form of carbon pricing, and I say that carbon tax is something. It's like a direct price. It's like basic tax. You are emitting X amount of tons of carbon, you have to pay tax based on that price we put. Again, different countries, different prices of carbon. Even within countries, there are states, especially like the US, where different states have policies that support carbon pricing. For example, the California, I think it's also in New York, not sure. But yeah, definitely in the California. And um, I feel that that's it's good for states to adopt their own set of carbon pricing, because it also helps people to, or companies to identify areas, and that would also reduce carbon leakage to an extent. um, but if it backfires, of course, that would have absolutely enlarge the whole carbon leakage issue, where, um, yeah, absolutely. So if, do you want to give some input on what's carbon leakage? Perhaps we can touch that a little bit. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think even though overall the um, price is decreasing, at some point, that's another reason why we cannot have a blanket type of deal, you know, for carbon pricing, because you cannot just say that every country has to start paying, because some countries are still developing. They are struggling to meet the basic needs of human life, and in that situation, I believe that if you are asked to pay, if you ask them to pay carbon taxes, that would not be that would not be ideal. Just to save one SDG, we would be actually um, I don't know, hanging up a lot of other SDGs for carbon taxes. But I think a huge way to um, reduce carbon leakage would also be to focus on the import and the export of goods. That is where Scope 3 emissions will also come into picture. If you are able to map proper Scope 3 emissions, or at least 99% of it, I feel that people, no matter where their setup is for manufacturing, or their wherever countries or states carbon tax they are paying, or carbon price, I feel that carbon leakage can be reduced a lot by focusing on where is their import and export majorly coming from, and it will be absolutely different for different types of sectors as well. um, Totally, yeah. I think that's one of the benefits of having carbon price also, because at some point between now and 2050, anybody, if all the listeners, if you are working between now and 2050, at some point within these next 30 years, you will end up paying price for carbon, and we have to be ready for that. People have to be ready for that. It may not be directly in the form of taxes, depending again on the economy of the country, and whether or not people are in a position to pay taxes. Especially, there are very small countries in the European region who are, you know, who may or may not have a good economy within themselves, but they are very rich in the real estate sector, because a lot of 1% rich people from the all across the globe, they have real estates bought up in in those countries. So then a way to tax them would be emissions from real estate sector doing that. So I think absolutely sure that um, we will be paying some form of carbon pricing. It could be also through corporates, and if that's another, that would be a subsegment of this, is internal carbon pricing, for corporates to go forward with that. That So yeah, I feel that in the real world there would be benefits of having carbon price, because then you are holding every person accountable for their mode of transportation, their mode of choosing electricity. People who refuse to have um, I mean, I understand the concerns of people, when they're refusing to have a renewable, for example, solar panel, or take electricity from the wind segment. It's understandable because they want consistency, and renewable energy does not give that level of consistency. But we have to address the fact that at some point, all of this funds from carbon pricing. Even for the normal taxes, I've heard people say that where is all this money going? When they don't see when they don't see the development of government hospitals or roads, or for example, some other public places and parks. People ask, where is all the taxpayer money going? But I think the major focus of this carbon pricing is that all that money will be redirected, all that funds will be redirected into investing in renewable technology or green technology, which is necessary, because fossil fuels are exhaustible. And if we have to, it's like two ends of the same string. If we have to pull out fossil fuels from our segment, we will have to bring in some new form of fuel, for example, hydrogen or ammonia or whatever it is. And for that, we need a lot of funds. So you don't want to, if you want more fund to be put into that, definitely, and those are very capital intensive, because developing a new technology which will change the entire um, carbon stream of the world, that would definitely need a lot of money flowing into it, and that's only way to get that is pricing people for what they're using at the moment. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Mm. Yeah, I agree with that because that is mainly put in place to reduce carbon leakage. And if there are companies, and I know this because I'm working with internal carbon pricing at the moment, and I know that many companies, not a lot, just a handful, are actually implementing internal cost of carbon so that they are trying to internalize all these externalities. And when that happens, companies are trying to put a shadow price or some form of tax or some small implicit fee within their operations so that they can reduce the emissions and use those funds, like I said, to direct it towards their particular investment in carbon, in green technology. So when this whole CBAC thing comes into effect, one thing that would happen is, um, I mean, we know that this can get pushed over to maybe 2030, if not if implemented um, at the procured state. But many companies will have to change their course of internal carbon pricing as well, along with the price they are paying externally for the emissions from their operations or from their manufacturing or whatever it is. Because right now, if they are pricing on the basis of the analysis done from the market value of carbon, what would change is that when the CBAC comes into play, um, they would have to align the cost they are paying internally or for any particular project which is carbon intensive in order to, yeah, basically they would have to align that with the cost that would come out if the border mechanism is in place, and they would have to pay both the prices then. So it is possible that the effectiveness of this would be reduced for companies who already have internal carbon pricing, um, if they do not take that into account. So this would be a suggestion to all the companies who are currently doing the internal carbon pricing scheme, that make sure that if your operations are within the geography where CBAC is going to be implemented, um, that at least 2 years prior to that, or any new projects coming up before or after 2024, should consider that any cost put on that, internal price put on that, should align with the CPAC. That is the only way that they can actually, yes, correct. Because this is very important for investment decisions, from a social perspective. Like you said, the social cost of carbon is in place because economists all across the globe think that climate change is a market failure, and to save everyone else's bottoms, it is important that we have this kind of pricing in place. But as human nature goes, we have a way to work around things, work around taxes, work around all this. But the fact that um, why I am not a huge believer of offsetting. It is important because if we don't focus on offset, the biodiversity is going to absolutely go into garbage. But we want that. We want people to focus more on offsetting. But the thing is that if I'm emitting 100 tons of carbon today, just today, that is going to stay in the atmosphere until and unless I suck it out, or if I don't focus on carbon sequestration. So if I, especially carbon sequestration is a high carbon intensive, sorry, cost intensive project. So if I'm able to pay a price for that and then reduce the amount of carbon emissions, or perhaps bring a new technology to increase efficiency and performance, then that would be a huge win, not just for me, but for everybody else around me. That is basically a success story of social cost of carbon. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here, Saket. We should definitely have another session going deep diving into one of these segments so that people have more awareness in terms of what they should expect in the future in terms of pricing carbon. Same.